Hello and what is up everyone, it is Hachi from the Art of Dota, and in this video I'm going to be explaining to you guys how to use Nightmare effectively. Now this is probably one of the most complicated abilities in the game, and it's most definitely Bane's most complex ability. So what Nightmare does is it puts an enemy unit or a friendly unit to sleep. Again, the sleeping units will be able to be attacked if they're an enemy unit. So either enemy hero, enemy creep, anything like that, you can attack them just fine. And this change was just newly added in the 7.07 update. Before, Nightmare used to actually do damage to either the friendly unit or the enemy unit, so you could actually deny teammates, or you can use it to damage enemy heroes. That no longer is possible. The duration is 4 seconds at level 1, and it scales up by 1 second each level to 7 seconds at level 4. Cast range at level 1 is pretty low, but at level 4 it's relatively good at 650, and if you add the 100 cast range to that, it's pretty decent cast range. Now one thing that doesn't say in this ability anywhere unless you kick the alt modifier is that the first second of Nightmare the unit is actually invulnerable, so it's basically a phase shift. So notice there, when your health bar disappears, you're actually invincible. Nothing can target you, nothing can damage you. And same thing if you use it onto a teammate. If there's no health bar, that means that they are invulnerable. And of course, the same applies to enemy heroes as well. Now, this is something that you have to keep in mind of when using the ability onto enemy heroes. You don't want to accidentally use it onto an enemy hero when your team is like casting a spell onto them, because it actually can allow an enemy hero to unintentionally dodge a stun, a Laguna Blade, Lion Finger, some big ability that your teammate is currently casting onto them. And that's why you have to be careful with your Nightmare usage during a team fight. Now, during a team fight, you're going to be using Nightmares for either one of two reasons. You either are winning the fight and you want to just save a target for later. And by save a target for later, I mean that they are not currently being targeted by anyone from your team, but they might be a threat to someone on your team or you. So what you want to do is you want to Nightmare them to save them for later so your team can finish them off after they're going for a kill on whoever hero they're currently after. And then, of course, they can transition to the Nightmare target, or they can just ignore the Nightmare target entirely. They might survive the team fight, but at least you made sure that they didn't mess with the current kill that you're going for. Now, the other time you're going to want to use Nightmare during a team fight is to disengage. And I'm only covering when you're going to use it on the enemy at this point. So when you want to use it on the enemy is either saving the kill for later, or just making sure they're out of the fight so they don't mess with the current kill that you're going after, or you are losing the fight and you want to sleep an important target that's going to chase after you so that you and your team can get away. Now those are the two times where you actually want to use Nightmare during a team fight onto an enemy hero. When you want to use Nightmare on an ally hero in a team fight is when they're getting attacked by an enemy hero, or an enemy ability like Axe Call is being used onto them, and you can use it for that 1 second invulnerability, which will allow Anti-Mage to survive the call, and then of course you can cancel the sleep, Anti-Mage can blink away. And that's going to be very good against, of course, abilities like Call that's going to force an attack, because you can even use it on the Axe, and then it's going to transfer over onto the AM. And of course, one thing that I forgot to mention is that you can end Nightmare at any time you want. So when you use it on an enemy hero, you can end it at any time you want. Same thing on yourself, and same thing on an ally. When you cast the ability Nightmare, it gets replaced with the sub-ability Nightmare End, and it will end all ongoing Nightmares. So if you for some reason have a refresher, it will actually end both Nightmares. Or if you have an Octarine and you end up, or it doesn't lower the cooldown enough. But I think the only other time where that mattered is when Bane's Agnums was different and he would apply Nightmare to every target that attacked him, but that's no longer a thing. And of course, it's very good against heroes like Legion as well, because you can have this funny interaction here where the Nightmare just gets passed back and forth, and it's very good from saving a target from duel as well as Axe Call. But keep in mind, with the 1 second invulnerability, it can be good against any spell in the game. any spell that has some type of cast time, any type of telling that they're going to use it, or even just instant spells as well. If you can really predict when the spell is coming, like Echo Slam, it's 1 second invulnerability, so it's like a phase shift, a 1 second phase shift that you can use on yourself or your ally to dodge any spell in the game. As I said, you want to be careful using on the enemy heroes because they could also dodge a spell from one of your teammates, and that's why it's such a hard ability to use. You can jump in a lobby and practice dodging spells with it, so you can have heroes cast spells onto you and then you can practice dodging with Nightmare. But during a live scenario where it's not you that you're worried about but a teammate, it's all different, because again, some easies or some abilities are really easy to spot out, like Axe, Call, and Legion. You can just cast a Nightmare and it nullifies the call, it nullifies the duel. But other abilities such as like Reaper Scythe, like Echo Slam, things like RP as well, it's going to be a lot harder to dodge it with the Nightmare, but you can, and that's where your potential to make big plays in mid to late game teamfights is how well you use Nightmare. Again, you don't want to just use it randomly in a fight just because. You want to save it for the right moment, and you need to be also in a position to cast it at the right time as well. And that's why positioning is so important on Bane, and that's why in my item guide I recommend buying so many different mobility items with the Tranquil Boots, Windlace, as well as a Force Staff, because you need to be in a good position to get your Nightmare off, because it definitely can change the fight. Let's say the enemy heroes commit everything onto AM to try to kill him. I get a clutch Nightmare off, I cancel it, he becomes invulnerable for 1 second, gets away with his blink, and it completely changed the outcome of the game. Whereas if I didn't Nightmare him, he might end up just dying and we lose the game. So Nightmare is not only good in a team fight to be used onto enemies to disrupt them, but also is very important to be able to use on your teammates during a team fight or yourself to save them from certain doom. Now, how do you want to use Nightmare effectively in the early game? Now, in the early game, first few minutes of the game, laning stage, you want to just use Nightmare onto enemy heroes to apply some additional harass. And this only applies if you have the mana regen to do so, which means that you have one or more clarities. I wouldn't recommend doing this if you don't have any clarities on you, because Nightmare does have a pretty high mana cost. At 165 at all levels, you can't really afford to use Nightmare for harass if you don't have any form of mana regen, whether clarity or mana boots. Same thing applies with your Brain Sap as well. As Brain Sap levels up, it does increase significantly in mana cost, so during mid-game fights, if you don't have mana boots, you don't have any form of regen, you don't want to cast it willy-nilly. So with the combination of Nightmare and Brain Sap, though, if you do have the mana regen to sustain it, you can dish out a lot of harass in the early game laning stage. And again, it does need to be paired with mana regen, because you don't want to get caught out with mana, because otherwise you're nothing more than a range creep. In addition, in the laning stage, you also can use Nightmare, of course, to set up for some abilities like Arrow. So I'm just going to create a Mirana here. So of course you can just Nightmare the Axe, and Mirana gets the arrow off, you land the arrow, and you can set up for a kill. And this is very good with other heroes as well. Even without a Mirana, any hero that needs to get in position to stun, something like a Shadow Shaman, a Lion, even a Pudge with Hook and Rot, Nightmare can be a free setup for your team. Of course, you have to make sure that there's not another enemy hero nearby. Otherwise, they can remove the Nightmare by A-attacking or A-clicking onto the current hero that is Nightmared, and they can transfer it over. Because again, Nightmare does get transferred over to whoever attacks the Nightmare target. And that includes your own allies, it includes you. Actually, with the new change, you can't transfer Nightmare over to yourself. I forgot to mention that. You used to be able to, but because of the change that they added where you can attack Nightmare targets. So for example, if you use it on a teammate, notice if I attack AM here, I'm A-clicking him, I can't transfer over to myself. And it's a bit weird, and I'm not sure if it's intended or not, but that's just how it works right now. Because you can attack heroes now that are Nightmared, same thing applies to your teammates, so you do technically attack them, but you can't attack teammates. So the way it works out is you just can't transfer Nightmare over to yourself. It's weird. I'm not sure if it's intended, but it's just how it works. Now, how do you want to be able to use Nightmare in a way that benefits your team in the late game? of course, I did mention saving your teammates, but also using it to just stall. You know, let's say there's a hero pushing your base, and you can just nightmare them, wait out for the full duration, and then transfer into a Fiend's Grip. This is really important to just buy enough time. Let's say your team is going for a base trade or just going for a push or something like that. You can be the one to TP back, and if the enemy heroes don't have like a Lincoln Sphere or any way to stop you from nightmaring them, you can just nightmare to delay. This is also very good during a team fight. If you find a hero on the side of the fight, it's almost the same as I said before, where you're kind of nightmaring a hero during a team fight to save them for your team later, but this also can apply to just delaying or preventing a hero from even joining the fight. If you catch a hero on the sidelines, you just nightmare them, remove them from the fight for 7 seconds, and then your team continue the fight elsewhere. So I hope this video taught you a lot about Nightmare, how to use it effectively, and about the intricacies of the ability, as it is a pretty complex ability, and damage type is still listed as pure. It doesn't do damage anymore. Valve, fix your stuff.